Director.
Director. One of a group of senior managers who run a company. For example, a non-executive director. Employ. To give somebody a job to do for payment. For example, employ somebody.
Employee. A person who is paid to work for somebody. For example, the firm has over 500 employees.
Employer. A person or company that pays people to work for them. For example, they're very good employers, equals they treat the people that work for them well.
Employment. Work, especially when it is done to earn money, the state of being employed. For example, full-time/part-time employment.
Encounter. To experience something, especially something unpleasant or difficult, while you are trying to do something else. For example, we encountered a number of difficulties in the first week.
Energy.
Energy. The strength, effort, and enthusiasm required for physical or mental activity, work, etc. For example, it's a waste of time and energy.
Enterprise. A company or business. For example, he is in charge of an enterprise with a turnover of $26 billion.
Executive.
Executive. A person who has an important job as a manager of a company or an organization. For example, company/corporate/business/industry executives.
Farming.
Farming. The business of managing or working on a farm. For example, to take up farming.
Firefighter.
Firefighter. A person whose job is to put out fires. For example, firefighters were called to a house in Summertown.
Firm. Fairly hard, not easy to press into a different shape. For example, a firm bed or mattress.
Flaw. A mistake in something that means that it is not correct or does not work correctly. For example, the argument is full of fundamental flaws. Forum. An event or medium where people can exchange opinions and ideas on a particular issue, a meeting organized for this purpose. For example, forum on something.
Framework.
Framework. The parts of a building or an object that support its weight and give it shape. For example, built on a wooden framework.
Franchise. Formal permission given by a company to somebody who wants to sell its goods or services in a particular area. Formal permission given by a government to somebody who wants to operate a public service as a business. For example, a franchise agreement/company.
Function.
Function. To work in the correct way. For example, we now have a functioning shower.
Gathering.
Gathering. A meeting of people for a particular purpose. For example, a social/family gathering.
Governance. The activity of governing a country or controlling a company or an organization, the way in which a country is governed or a company or institution is controlled. For example, he emphasized the company's commitment to high standards of corporate governance.
Hire. The act of paying to use something for a short time. For example, a hire car. Hire. The act of paying to use something for a short time. For example, a hire car.
Hobby. An activity that you do for pleasure when you are not working. For example, do you have any hobbies?
Inspector. An officer of middle rank in the police force. For example, Inspector Maggie Forbes.
Integrate.
Integrate. To combine two or more things so that they work together, to combine with something else in this way. For example, integrate into / with something.
Integrated.
Integrated. In which many different parts are closely connected and work successfully together. For example, an integrated program of patient care.
Integration. The act or process of combining two or more things so that they work together. For example, the aim is to promote closer economic integration.
Intensive. Involving a lot of work or activity done in a short time. For example, an intensive language course.
Job. Work for which you receive regular payment. For example, I don't have a job at present.
Journal.
Journal.
A newspaper or magazine that deals with a particular subject or profession. For example, a scientific and academic journal.
Journalism. The work of collecting and writing news stories for newspapers, magazines, radio, television or online news sites, the news stories that are written. For example, I'd like a career in journalism.
Journalist. A person whose job is to collect and write news stories for newspapers, magazines, radio, television, or online news sites. For example, a freelance journalist.
Junior.
Junior. Having a low rank in an organization or a profession. For example, a junior partner / minister / officer.
Labor.
Labor.
Work, especially physical work. For example, manual labor equals work using your hands.
Lazy. Unwilling to work or be active, doing as little as possible. For example, he was not stupid.
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle. The way in which a person or a group of people lives and works. For example, many people are trying to adopt a healthy lifestyle these days.
Literature.
Literature. Pieces of writing that are valued as works of art, especially novels, plays and poems, in contrast to technical books and newspapers, magazines, etc. For example, English, American, French literature. Logo. A printed design or symbol that a company or an organization uses as its special sign. For example, all over the world there are red and white paper cups bearing the company logo.
Make. The name or type of a machine, piece of equipment, etc. that is made by a particular company. For example, make of something.
Manager.
Manager. A person who is in charge of running a business, a shop or a similar organization or part of one. For example, a bank / hotel manager.
Master.
Master. A man who has people working for him, often as servants in his home. For example, they lived in fear of their master.
Meeting.
Meeting. An occasion when people come together to discuss or decide something. For example, 800 people attended the public meeting.
Miner. A person who works in a mine taking out coal, gold, diamonds, etc. For example, rescuers are trying to save miners trapped underground after a gas explosion.
Mobilize. To work together in order to achieve a particular aim, to organize a group of people to do this. For example, the unions mobilized thousands of workers in a protest against the cuts.
Niche.
Niche. A comfortable or suitable role, job, way of life, etc. For example, he eventually found his niche in sports journalism.
Nominee. A person who has been formally suggested for a job, a prize, etc. For example, he was chosen as the party's presidential nominee.
Occupation. A job or profession. For example, please state your name.
Office.
Office. A room, set of rooms or building where people work, usually sitting at desks. For example, the company is moving to new offices on the other side of town.
Operate. To work in a particular way. For example, most domestic freezers operate at below -18 degrees Celsius.
Operational. Connected with the way in which a business, machine, system, etc. works. For example, operational activities/costs/difficulties.
Original. A document, work of art, etc. produced for the first time, from which copies are later made. For example, this painting is a copy, the original is in Madrid.
Photographer. A person who takes photographs, especially as a job. For example, a wedding/wildlife/fashion photographer.
Pilot. A person who operates the controls of an aircraft, especially as a job. For example, an airline pilot.
Policeman. A male police officer. For example, a plainclothes/uniformed policeman.
Politician. A person whose job involves politics, especially as an elected member of parliament, etc. For example, democratically elected politicians.
Practitioner. A person who works in a profession, especially medicine or law. For example, dental practitioners.
Presentation.
Presentation. A meeting at which something, especially a new product or idea, or piece of work, is shown to a group of people. For example, presentation on / about somebody / something.
Preside. To lead or be in charge of a meeting, ceremony, etc. For example, the presiding judge.
Press. To push part of a device, etc. in order to make it work. For example, press something.
Processor.
Processor. A machine, person or company that processes things. For example, the company is Ireland's largest dairy processor.
Productivity.
Productivity. The rate at which a worker, a company or a country produces goods, and the amount produced, compared with how much time, work and money is needed to produce them. For example, high improved increased productivity.